Well, look, so modularity, that is a term we see a lot in crypto, but really, what does it mean? And to help answer that question, how it works with like Web3, I've got these gents on stage, some of the top minds in Web3 and crypto. So let's start with that, like modularity. Like, what does it mean and how does it work in Web3?
Okay, yeah, happy to go first.
Sure.
I mean, to me, it all started with Celestia, right? And they pushed this like modularity narrative, and they've done some great innovations in terms of making blockchains more modular, separating consensus from execution that we all know. But modularity has been part of the blockchain space and systems design for like forever, right? So in my mind, I don't really get, a lot of the times, you see new projects they launch now, it's a big narrative. It's like modular, DeFi hub or whatever. It's hard to know what it means, right? So from my point of view, when we're talking about any system like Near, Solana, any complex blockchain, there's many different layers of modularity in that. And we have other experts here who have built their own blockchain, so I'll let them talk more about that. From the point of view of Axelar and what modularity means for us, I think I'll just talk about an example of how you can build truly modular applications across different chains with Axelar. And actually, the first time I saw such an application launching, such an example, was when I was reading your implementation of the Rainbow Bridge with Near, right? And you were talking about an example where you can have Uniswap on Ethereum, where a user interfaces with the Uniswap contract, but behind the scenes, you can pass a message to Near, where you do the swap computation, and then you pass the message back on Ethereum, and you execute the transaction, right? And you can do much cheaper operations that way, right? And that to me was a pivotal moment, and it really inspired a lot of the things we did with Axelar. But I think that's how you can build modular applications, kind of different from, I guess, how Celestia builds modular blockchains, but I think it's a big part of how we're seeing the future.
Okay, cool. Who wants to add to that?
So, yeah, I would say kind of modularity has, let's call them levels, right? So it starts with, my code is modular, right? I have, librs, it's a module, and this is where my code lives. You then go to my system is modular. So Georgios mentioned, so Near actually from the day one was designed by separating consensus from execution. It just all lived in one project. And because of this, it took me 8 hours to integrate our execution with Tendermint. Because it's like Tendermint is also a separated consensus from execution, and we had execution separated from consensus, and so I just plugged them in together. And here's you have a new blockchain, right, with Near's WebAssembly and Tendermint consensus. And so that is kind of the system level, which is like really useful when you want to debug things, when you want to engineer your systems. Now then there's the next level, which is kind of security modularity, right? So this is when, as you're launching new chains, you want to source security from other blockchain or from other partners, right? And this is where I would say right now, kind of with data availability and kind of execution settlement meme, right, separation, a lot of the conversation is because the idea that you actually are able to only focus on one piece of the stack and then the rest is kind of being done by somebody else, but the security of the whole system is still kind of like the same or, with asterisks. And finally, I think the other part is you have the modularity of the teams and incentives. The way to think about it, like as you launching your own project, you can launch your own token, which creates new incentives, is able to hire people, is able to build things. And so that itself allows to have kind of different teams. And the Cosmos is actually a really good example of that, where there's a bunch of teams which have their own token that allow them to build their own applications. But they all kind of interact and share a lot of the code base as well and kind of contribute to it. So that's kind of, to me, like the spectrum of modularity, depending on, different levels.
Yeah, it makes sense. How about on Solana? What does that look like for modularity?
Yeah, Solana's interesting because one of the decisions made very early on was that consensus and execution would not be two layers. They would be the same layer, and this is part of how Solana is able to achieve the performance that it does. Now, there's certainly downsides to that, but there are also downsides to modularity. These systems are all about choices and trade-offs. there is no such thing as perfect architecture. Every architecture is downsides, every architecture is upsides, and it's about choosing what architecture you want to optimize for the performance characteristics of a network. So, Solana, in that way, it is the most monolithic chain except from Bitcoin. Now, I think the term monolithic doesn't really mean anything. Bitcoin is probably the only monolithic chain, if we can use that term. But I can spin you a story about how Solana has a modular thesis as well. You can write in 5 different programming languages, which all compile down to something that runs in LLVM and BPF. And so you can write programs in all these different ways. And that's a modular approach in some senses, right? You can have, on the smart contract level, lots of interoperability between different, modules, if we want to call them that. I don't think that's a useful definition of modular because it means that every blockchain now is operating on a modular framework, right? Everyone who has multiple core teams that have independent funding sources that are all building towards the same product, like, is Linux modular? I guess the answer is yes, right? But at some point, there's a kernel. All these modular systems, when you break them down, they all have critical points of failure that rely on one component. And that's not a knock on modular, that's just how software works, right? And so I think if we're defining modular as there are different modules and you can do different things with them, and they can be swapped out periodically, I'm not sure that's a particularly helpful definition of modular. At the same time, there aren't actually real blockchains today that are pulling core components from independent development teams, right? The closest we maybe have is something like Base, but Base is a core contributor to Optimism. They're not, they're contributing most of the code to that project at this point, or at least a significant portion of the code. So they're not really actually pulling from a modular stack in the way that, you might assume like a Web2 company can say, I'm going to pull in Shopify and I'm going to pull in, WordPress, and I'm going to pull in all these sort of Web2 modular components and build an e-commerce website. I think we're nowhere near that today where you don't have to actually care about how these modules work and basically have your own team build and run.
What about then APIs? Because the modern website has APIs that power the back end. So you can use a Shopify thing.
Yes. So we don't have anything like that in Web3 yet. There's a lot of people talking about it, and there's some folks building it. But if you actually look at a system today and say, I want to use 4 different components, I want to have a Solana virtual machine that runs in a different execution layer, that uses a different DA layer, that then settles to Ethereum, there's people building that. But, when we actually look at it, most of these things are a fully vertical integrated stack that basically is the same core development teams at each layer of the stack. We're not actually seeing modularity in production yet.
Okay. Maybe.
Yeah, just to add on that, so we see, different doctrines, right? In Web3, we've seen the monolithic doctrine within rollup centric, and the modular thesis, breaking it down actually to the execution, settlement, consensus, and data availability. But, when we start thinking about that in Lava, and Codius for Celestia for bringing the modular thesis and, pumping it to the point, I think, there is one aspect, an element that is left behind. And this is how do you get access? How do you get access to all of those different blockchains? I'm sure that you're going to ask the basic user of website today, and no one knows what is TCP/IP. No one knows what version of HTTP using behind the cloud. They even don't know if they're interacting with the website. Is the server now based in Eastern Europe? Is it what cloud? GCP, AWS? You have zero understanding of that as a day-to-day user. And if we really want to bring the killer app for the next bull run and the cycle of adoption that everyone here is anticipating, we need to build a much better tooling for accessing those blockchains. And I think, that's what we're trying to do in Lava.
That makes sense because most people on the web don't know what AWS or Azure is or know about Apache servers. Yeah, but it just works for them. And that billion, person web community, it just works for them. So I guess with Web3 and crypto, we have to get to the point where the tech side's not that important, where it's all about the UI UX. Is that correct?
I think, you define it exactly right. Why most of the people here in this room knows about RPC. I guess API is a more common way, but why they need to know even about that? And this is because the access today is super fragmented, and you need to choose a node provider. You need to run to run your node, or you need to go to a public RPC. That is something every ecosystem provides. And in order to break this routine, you need to lower the barrier for entry for dApps to build on top.
Okay, that makes sense. There must be some challenges to modularity, right? Like it must not be all roses. There must be some issues that come up with bugs, security, that kind of stuff, with speed. Let's talk about that. Talk about the challenges in modular coding.
Don't get us started. So I think the fundamental challenge of the current modularity wave, right, and as well as I would include in a way Cosmos kind of ecosystems approach as well, is that it creates this highly fragmented experience, right? Like although you have individual app chains or you have like a bunch of rollups, now as a user you kind of need to navigate all that, understand exactly security assumptions and kind of guarantees that every individual chain provides, and there's no real easy way to do that, right? Like right now for L2s there's L2 beat, and you kind of need to like almost like every day check in to make sure they didn't roll back something. And like for example for Blast today, right, there's like a whole note on L2 beat right now sitting there that says nobody can verify, like nobody can reconstruct the state of Blast right now from the data availability. So like that's a level of like understanding you need to have when you're using this kind of like fragmented environment. And so that obviously creates tremendous strain on UX of the whole thing. It creates obviously problems with developer experience as well, because as a developer you now kind of deciding on like a very weird matrix of like where you hope users will converge to, where you think the improvements to the underlying infrastructure will continue happening, and you're kind of making a bet. And like we're already like it's startup on startup on startup, right? You're taking a risk over risk over risk that like hopefully users will come here, hopefully the chain will continue functioning, and all the underlying infrastructure, all the layers underneath also will function in the right way. So that is challenging, but you also have the opportunity, because if you're launching your app chain, you're launching your rollup, you have kind of the flexibility that you wouldn't have, for example, with a more like layer one approach like Near and Solana, where you cannot customize a lot of the underlying things. So that's big trade-off, and we can talk about how to fix that.
Yeah, I think that's a couple of great points, and there's definitely positives, right, to modularity, especially that now as a developer you're incentivized to focus on a certain part of the stack. You can also create a token and create a community around it, but at the same time you add a ton of complexity, right? And I want to talk about a particular example in the Cosmos ecosystem that directly affects the end users, right? So in Cosmos today, we have a few, there's probably like 5 components involved in this. So there's the Noble chain, which issues native USDC on Cosmos. There's the DYDX chain, which is powered by this native USDC. It's bridged over from Noble chain through IBC to DYDX. And then for onboarding USDC and other assets from other chains, they use Axelar, and in particular an application built on top called Squid. And then behind the scenes, you also have relayers that pass messages, between EVM chains and Axelar, and then between all the Cosmos chains, right? So all in all, you have 5 different teams. So let's say once in a while, with blockchains, they're complex systems, some transactions fall through, right? So then the DYDX team, which is an amazing team, the most customer-centric team I've seen in the space, they're like, okay, we have to understand what's happening. And then they go to the Squid team, and the Squid team has to understand what's happening. Sometimes they come to our team. We have to go to the relayers.
Sounds like heavy friction points.
It is maybe those components would not be built without having all these diverse teams and incentives. But yeah, I don't know what's the solution, but it's pretty complex, right? And it's something we have to fix.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to just say the solution is one global state machine, but in some ways the solution is one global state machine, right? This is sort of, and you can believe the Solana thesis or not, but one of the visions here of how you address this is you build a base layer that is extremely fast, but is very unopinionated. And this is sort of a difference in the philosophy of how you can build these things. If you're treating the base layer as a very opinionated framework, then you sort of have to have modularity on top of it in order to get to different places and different executions. Solana has a full EVM compatibility layer on it through Neon, and that's just implemented in smart contracts. But all of the state for those EVM programs is actually stored on Solana. There's a very funny thing where, to get historical data for an EVM program, they're actually using the Geyser plugin to index data directly from the Solana base layer because it's all stored in that same state. And so that's not necessarily the right approach for everyone. There's certainly downsides to the Solana, vision of the world. And one of those is that because the execution and the consensus are in the same layer, it's a little bit more fragile of a system from a liveliness perspective. Whereas you can see, last summer, Ethereum had a finality incident twice where blocks were not finalizing for an extended period of time, but the network could keep going on the VM side, right? That's an advantage of that system compared to the, what Solana has. The difference there, though, is you can do a lot more with more limited resources through something like Solana. And this is where the question of how do you build these systems in a way the user doesn't need to know about them, that's a really hard problem because we've sort of built everything in blockchain assuming everyone knows about everything. And, when someone gets rugged, the response used to sort of be from the community, you should have done better research. You should have had better OPSEC. You should have, why were you using a software wallet? Why weren't you using a hardware wallet? And, I sort of see a world where we're getting into a modular framework. And if you have 6 or 7 different components and there's a problem in one of those components, the reason this works in Web 2 is you have someone to sue, right? If Shopify misprocesses your credit cards and either doesn't charge your credit cards or something, you have an SLA, you have recourse to them. We don't have recourse in blockchain because these are all open source projects run by thousands of people all around the world, and that's the beauty of it. But I think that is the key piece to address with any sort of modular thesis is how do you create systems that actually provide insurance and guarantees when something goes wrong?
But without that recourse and insurance, you won't have boomers get on board, right? Because boomers control half the world's wealth. It's a fact. And they can shop online because they're confident that Visa or Shopify will have their back should they get hacked or should this transaction not work out. But with DeFi, with blockchain, you don't have that insurance.
Yeah, I mean, this is the 2.5% to 4% that merchants pay every time you use a credit card. We're all paying a tax for that insurance fund, and maybe that's the solution.
Well, I mean, not to bring back from the morning, but kind of one of the core ideas is to abstract all this complexity, you do need to design systems a little bit differently, right? And we had, for example, Adrian from Monoma presenting intent-based architecture. That is an approach where, as a user, you don't need to prescribe, hey, I want to, move through Squid into DYDX, for USDC that's issued in Noble, right? I should not need to know that. And so ideally, I just provide an intent and I want to trade on DYDX. And here's my stablecoin that is in my wallet. And there's somebody who is a professional who can handle all the edge cases, who has insurance funds, who is able to, replay, who probably runs relayers, who can execute kind of all of that behind the scene. And that's, I think, part of the kind of moving forward as we abstracting out some of this complexity for integrated or modular. Actually, I don't think it matters. The kind of experience of providing user a way to just specify their intent, to specify the end result, and really moving the kind of execution away from user toward more professional kind of, be that market makers or whatever, solvers, call them whatever you want, is the way to go forward. Because I don't think anyone, even if I'm an individual and I understand every single piece of this technology, I don't want to deal with it.
And I think that what Nir is doing now with chain abstraction and abstracting the different layers, this is the way of how to lower to increase the usability for different users and devs to build at the end of the day. When we started, we've seen that we need to trust a node provider to bring us the data, right? And what about single point of failure? If the node provider is down, nobody can get access or even the account balance, do transaction. And when we started to define Lava with the different piece of, we thought about the different pieces of the modularity, and we realized that if Lava will not be 100% available, how will user get the service? That's the basic action, the RPC, and that's what I'm super excited about. A module that we call it constant availability, and even if the chain halts, user can still get the top node provider and communicate it with that. And when we think about modularity and how it will decrease the different layers of increasing the dApps communication overall, we have to think about that, because chain will halt, some different components will be broken, but at the end of the day, we don't want to pay the 2.5% of insurance.
So how does that work? If the chain halts, how can you still use the dApps without the chain, keeping up with everything?
So that's one of the bread and butter. We introduced the SDK. It's a communication peer-to-peer protocol, which means that straight from the browser, Lava fetch a list that constantly updated. So even if the Lava chain halts, you still have the list, the dApps still have the list, and they communicate directly with the providers. Anyway, it's a lazy chain implementation, so it doesn't need to be super fast. And once the transaction is finished, or the session between the dApp and the provider is finished, all the different parameters are collected and goes back to the chain when it comes back.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess we can use this to talk now about how you maintain uptime and SLA while having a very modular platform, right? Because no chain likes to have downtime, as Solana knows. And it's important to keep things up and online, right? Even when you have a very complex system. So let's talk about that. Talk about modularity and SLA.
Yeah, for us, I think the solution, especially when it comes to interoperability, we took a similar approach to Solana, I would say, where we have a single network handling all the different connections, and we're looking to make this single network maximally decentralized. And of course, there's other security mechanisms like rate limits we can add on top to make it more secure. But I think the core idea of having a fully integrated network that you can trust for all your cross-chain needs, all the different networks, is how we solve this. I think one industry where I think that we've seen this makes a lot of sense is when we're talking to different financial institutions, right? Financial institutions typically are heavily regulated entities. They do not want to work with 10 different teams, right? They want to work with 1 or 2 high-quality teams that can provide white glove service. And sometimes we even get the question, okay, you guys can solve the interoperability, we'll work with someone else to launch a chain, but we don't want to touch anything else, right? So can you guys also add an Oracle, which we're actually working to add an enshrined Oracle to Axelar, because I guess our infrastructure is very compatible with Oracle infrastructure anyway. But it seems at least the more serious players in the space, assuming they eventually come and build and commercialize interesting products, they do prefer the integrated approach. And I guess we took kind of the fully integrated approach of Solana when it comes to interoperability.
Yeah, I think maybe more principally, the whole idea of blockchain is that we have no reliance on a single, point of failure, and also single locus of control, ideally. And I think that's that principle can be applied at any level, and you can design systems to do that. Even when you have, for example, for a rollup, you have a centralized sequencer, but you can have, you can be posting, for example, your data availability to multiple DA providers, right? So there's NearDA, Celestia, and for example, EigenDA launching, you can do its so-called dual quorum, which even if one of them is having issues, for example, you can still have reliability. given data availability, now you can have what's the leader-follower architecture, and where the followers are reading that data availability and have a hot swap ready nodes which can be accepted transactions. You have reliability on a settlement layer because of the consensus that prefers liveness. So you can have kind of a system design that is able to deal with things going down, failures in the network, failed transactions, etc. Replays. But you do need kind of a more sophisticated design and more sophisticated actors to be like facing that. And then on the other side, you can have a simple APIs and SDKs that actually abstract all that out to really allow kind of, application developers and users not to deal with all that, right?
Fallbacks are a super important, concept in Web3. And I think when I presented before the constant availability that we have in Lava, we also want to allow a production-grade services for enterprises, to ensure a SLA, as you mentioned before. And that's how flexible I think any type of protocol has to be, because when we think about a specific enterprise that wants the certain latency, the support, and in general the SLA, you need to allow that when you defining the protocol itself. And for example, in Lava, we are able to specify a specific provider that the enterprise would like to speak with directly. It doesn't have to go back to the pool of different providers and randomly choose. You can make sure that the latency, the availability, and freshness of the data is suitable for you and maintain over a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a component where we've kind of lost the cypherpunk in a lot of these conversations.
How so?
SLAs, I mean, these are not SLAs, right? SLAs are binding contract agreements that software companies have with another. We're talking about uptime targets, and there's a lot you can do to hit uptime targets, and there's a lot you might not be able to do. But I think we forget that most Web 2 systems went through periods of instability in their beginning. Twitter used to crash all the time. AWS used to go down all the time. TSMC, when they tried new manufacturing fab techniques, sometimes they just would not work. These are all processes of getting faster, better, and quicker. And I think that sometimes there's been a drift in crypto towards highly regulated institutional finance. We got to get the big banks on chain. And I think we've lost a little bit of the drive to make things performant. I don't think there's enough product market fit yet in this industry for us to really focus on triple level redundancy at this point in the stack. And this is obviously easy for someone to say from Solana, where we're like, there has been stability issues with the network. That being said, there's a lot of things that are built on Solana that are impossible to build anywhere else because the performance of the chain is just unmatched anywhere else. There's downsides to that, right? There is occasional outages, but this is also true in the L2 landscape. Every single major L2 has suffered outages as well. Sometimes they have scheduled downtime. And scheduled downtime.
Azure has downtime as well, right? Or Amazon.
Yeah, certainly. And now, granted, something like Amazon, the amount of downtime they have on AWS is far lower because they have so much redundancy built in, because they have product market fit. They're almost post-scale at this point. And so that's when the reliability investments really come in. I think we still need to probably 10 to 100x the performance of blockchain in general before we really are dealing with serious enough problems that need 6 nines of uptime.
Okay, that makes sense. So to wrap things up, what's the future? Because crypto loves buzzwords, right? Like every year we have a new word come through. Is modularity one of those words, right? Is it something that's here to stay? Or will next year we have a new word to describe the same thing?
Well, we already have a new word, chain abstraction. So I'm just going to keep pushing that. But yeah, I mean, modularity, I would say, okay, it's here. We have it going, great. Now things are like super fragmented, hard to use, and need better coordination. So we need chain abstraction. So we abstract all that back and make it easy to use. And so I think that's going to be like we already see this transition happening, including I think spaces with Celestia about chain abstraction tomorrow. So I think we'll see that transition happening over the next 3 months.
I think just to touch Celestia, I think even Mustafa himself called at the beginning the concept pluggable in his lazy ledger paper from 3-4 years ago. And I think that this year, with the implementation of different chains that up and coming rollups, we need to think also about composability, and this term will not go away from us.
Yeah, and we start building abstraction on top of modularity, and then suddenly you have to de-abstract the abstractions in order to get back to the core, because composability turns out it really matters, and ZK technology is not moving anywhere near as fast as we hoped it would with hardware accelerated provers. And you just get into a cycle very quickly where modularity is certainly going to be a component of blockchain because it always has been a component of blockchain. We've just finally put a name to it so people can sell tokens. And that's valuable and useful, right? That sounds sort of disparaging, but I really don't mean it that way.
On the coin, right?
But so narratives are important because narratives are a collective process of trying to figure out if the ideas we have are actually good or not. And there's something actually, to defend the narrative cycle in crypto, there's something really nice about us all arguing about stuff before we go off and spend 6 years building it to realize this was actually the wrong choice and the wrong path entirely. I mean, you could just look at the debates on how Ethereum was going to scale from massively scale, the current network as one global state to adding up to 100 different shards to this entirely different model now. It was very easy to just pick one of those and say, we're going to build this thing, but maybe that would have been, it turns out that what the community wanted was something very different, and you don't necessarily know that till you go through a discovery process.
Exactly, yeah. I think this discovery process, this open discovery process is kind of unique to the space and great to experience in real time. Yeah, for me, I don't think modularity is going to be a relevant buzzword a year or two down the line. It's been around for 50 years, right? It's going to be around for a long time, but I don't think if I tell anyone, we're going to be building modular applications in 50 years, I don't think anyone will care, right? What people care about is to build interesting products. And I think chain abstraction is what describes this user experience that we're all aspiring to, right? Where I can go on my phone, I can open up a wallet, maybe I have some assets, I go and type, I access an application, I use the funds on the application, behind the scenes, maybe there's some intent-driven infrastructure that submits my transaction. It doesn't really matter, right? As a user, I should not have to think about Solana, Avalanche, Polygon,
Yeah, I will say we do actually have one area where this is true today, which are deep-end networks, right? Decentralized physical infrastructure networks. There are large institutions using deep-end networks and they don't even know it. There are users using Helium Mobile who don't know they're running on a crypto backhaul carrier. So this may actually start off with very intense technical products before it actually gets to user products.
Well, we also have it for user products too, right? So I think the thing is it's already here. It just this is also where sometimes narratives are ahead, sometimes they're behind, right? But I think the benefit here is that at the end we will figure out how to unite all those things, and instead of having kind of a more I would say Twitter feuds, we actually will get to, hey, here's a product that worked, right? And they're benefiting from this technology. And, we actually see reduction in cost or even building things that are really impossible to coordinate without this in using Web3. And I think that's when we don't need buzzwords anymore. We just won.
More building, less trolling. So you get the last word. What do you think?
A lot of pressure. I think, what we listened before to early today to Vitalik about account abstraction. I think one of the key words that this amazing panel said before, it's community. The community will vouch. The community will decide what are the interesting projects, and we're gonna make sure that building that is super scalable to bring the next killer app that everyone here wants to see, right?
Absolutely. Well, guys, that was great. Thanks so much.